So another often ignored topic is the differences and the similarities between mainstream Hindu religion and the indigenous religions
Yes.
of Northeast, or basically tribals of
Tribal.
across India.
Across. Yeah, that's a very interesting question because there are two ways of looking at the tribal non-tribal relations: the Hindu and the so-called indigenous faith relations. One is the British way, the European way. They use the anthropological parameters and try to look at the differences between the people, between the communities. What are the differences? What are the differentiators among these communities? There are about 180 tribes in Northeast. Each has its own language, each has its own way of dressing, each has its own way of worship. Outwardly, they all look very different from each other. And to add to the problem, especially in Northeast, the villages are homogeneous. If it is a Rabha tribal village, only Rabhas live there. If it is a Karbi tribal village, only Karbis live. If it is a Lalung tribal village, only Lalungs live there. So Assam, I always say, is like a railway compartment. Different compartments, geographically put together, each one living in a silo. So these tribal communities, basically all these tribal communities look different from one another, and they look vastly different from the rest of the country. So the way the headgear is worn, the way the scarf is worn, and the way the weapons are handled. So these differences, Britishers and the British-sponsored, European-sponsored anthropologists and missionaries have a great role in anthropology.
You mean in writing the
The
narrative of
early
anthropology?
missionaries were also anthropologists. For instance, in Andhra Pradesh, to give you an instance, Himandorf was a Christian preacher who came to Andhra Pradesh, and he later became an anthropologist and an expert on Gonds. He stopped proselytization, he started working only among the Gonds as an anthropologist. So that was true of most of the Northeast. So they only looked at the differences, how they are different from the Hindus. There's another way of looking at the tribal, non-tribal relations. That is the Indian way of looking. We must look at the similarities. If we do not look at the similarities, they all look very different. Behind the external differences lies an internal unity, which people can feel only when you are closer to the communities. For instance, all the tribals believe in the concept of reincarnation. All the tribals, whether they are Nagas, the pre-Christian religion of the Nagas, Mijos, Karbis, Rabhas, all tribals, Kukis, you name it, all these tribals had the concept of Punarjanma. All these tribals had a concept of Kala Ganana, measurement of time. It matched with the measurement of time that the non-tribal Hindu, so-called urbanized and ruralized Sanatani Hindus had. It's very similar to their. The Purnimas and Amavasyas, the full moon and half moon days, they match. The tribal way of calculating the Purnima and Amavasya, the non-tribal or the Sanatani Hindu way of calculating Purnima and Amavasya are similar. There's one more similarity that you would not find anywhere in the world, the concept of Adhika Masa. In our almanacs, we have this Adhika Masa to adjust the timelines. The same concept of Adhika Masa lies in all the tribals of Northeast, be it Mizo, be it Tripuri, Jamatia, whatever.
So it's a lunar calendar?
That's a lunar calendar that they follow, and most tribals have this concept of Amavasya and Purnima. They have their own names for it, but it is very much there. Bhumi Puja, before starting anything, performing Bhumi Puja is an essential ingredient of every tribal faith and practice. For example, in Arunachal Pradesh, there is a tribe which has a specific Bhumi Puja ritual. It is called Sidoni Puja, Sidoni, Sidoni Puja. Without performing Sidoni Puja, they do not take up any activity. So most of the Bhumi Puja rituals have been lost after they have become Christianized. But in communities that have not been Christianized, this Bhumi Puja exists. Dormitories, having dormitories, like Brahmacharya Ashram, young men's dormitories is an essential part of every tribal community, which is equivalent to our Gurukulas, where only the boys live. There are mentors, they teach them how to live. All these dormitories, for example, the Lalung communities, I have visited those young boys' dormitories. They are known as Morung, Morung. The Morung dormitory, the youth gather, they take up works together. There's community activity, there's a lot of teaching going on, there's a lot of mentoring going on. Tasks are given, and then people are asked to perform. Headhunting again is a task that is given to the young people. If you don't hunt ahead, you won't get a girl. It was as simple as that. So it is these similarities that are very important. I think the Indian way of looking at things is to look for points of convergence. That's how we try to, find an oneness in the diversity. That's a typical Indian way of looking at things. Most of the tribals have, same kind of rituals, same kind of, the way they look may be very different. But then there is a lot of similarity between the tribal practices and Hindu practices. In fact, the hills were worshipped. Hindus also worshipped the rivers were worshipped, the nature was worshipped, stones were worshipped. The same way, the Hindu community also has this so-called Hindu society too has the same kind of practices. They have this concept of Grama Devata. And the Grama Devata and the village deities in the tribal communities of Northeast, they are not different. So a lot of practices there is similarity. And the whole point depends on what you are looking at. Are you looking at the differences, or are you looking at the commonalities?
I would say the whole point is what your agenda is. So if you actually look at the way the Britishers differentiated, clearly their agenda was not right.
Yes.
They had ulterior motives, which is why they, even though they saw the similarities, they didn't record it because it doesn't suit their agenda, which was to divide them. So that was a deliberate attempt, I would say, of not turning the other way and not looking at the similarities and only pointing out to the external differences that, visible
external differences.
Yes.
Absolutely. So that is how they tried to divide the people.
Okay.
The biggest problem in Northeast, as I said, was villages were homogeneous. You may live for 100 years together, but a Karbi and a Rabha don't meet each other. They live in small worlds of their own. They don't intermarry also.
That's a big one.
And they don't even meet one another. You live for 100 years, but there's no point of, there's
so
no
they don't
meeting
dine
point.
together, they don't...
That's not actually possible. Yes.
Okay.
So that is one major advantage that the Britishers found.
To this day? The tribals
To this day also, despite a century and a half of Christian proselytization, there is no intermingling of the tribals. I'll give you a very funny incident. During the 1980s, there were, there were very serious battles between the Nagas and Kukis. Nagas and Kukis lived together in Manipur and parts of Assam. The villages are close by. There was a battle of supremacy between the Kukis and the Nagas. You know what happened? The whole of the Naga village, they take arms and then they attack the Kuki village. The Kukis, they take up their arms and they charge on the Nagas. What happens then is the Naga priest leads the prayers to kill the Kuki Christians, and the Kuki priest, a pastor, a Christian pastor, he reads verses from the Bible to say that the Nagas need to be killed.
Wait a minute. So you're saying that the tribals have not intermingled or intermarried or
they have not even become one society.
Despite the conversions?
Despite becoming Christians and being Christians for decades. That's what I'm trying to impress upon. Okay. A Naga village, side by side a Mizo village, a Kuki village. Kukis attack Nagas or Nagas fight Kukis. The priests of both the communities, ethnic groups, They pray for the victory of their respective ethnic group and death to the fellow Christians from the other tribe.
Okay.
In
So
case
by
of
this,
Hutus and
just by
Tutsis,
this, I could conclude that Christianity is a failed mission in the North.
it's a superficial one. It's a superficial. They had a field day because there was no opposition, there was no counter force because of the inner line regulations and because of the faulty policies of the government of India post independence.
So the only thing that changed is their deity.
Exactly. Nothing else changed. Living together for 100 years, living in Christ for 100 years have not brought Kutis and Nagas together, Rabhas and Lalungs together, Lalungs and Karbis together.
Yeah, that's an interesting, really interesting
So
point.
the Christianity has not brought them together. That is the biggest point that that needs to be understood in the context of Northeast.
Sudhakarji, in your a decade and a half of living in the Northeast, would you like to share any personal experiences that you've had with the missionaries as well as the tribals?
Yeah. Basically, majorly I worked among the plains people.
Not the hills.
Not the hills, but then there were some areas in my jurisdiction which were essentially tribal, and there was definitely conversion activities among those tribals. For instance, a lot of villages the pastors used to visit. They tried to convert the local kings, local chieftains, village heads. So we used to oppose them or try to sensitize the Hindu tribals to fight them or to prevent conversions. So these activities, as part of these activities, we have explored newer areas, and my own interaction with the tribals has shown that it is the isolated battle that they are fighting against Christianity, a very well organized, globally linked setup that they are fighting. That is that is at the root cause of the conversions. For
What do you
instance,
mean by tribals were fighting isolated fights?
a Karbi fights his own battle. He's not linked to the rest of the
Those are
society.
not.
And he gets no support from the Hindu society in the plain area. They do not even know that this is a religious battle is being fought, a cultural war is being fought. And the missionaries have a globalized mechanism where something happens, some ordinary tribal opposes, and the moment the news gets flashed in New York and all other places. So this was the major problem. So once we went to a village called Kolampur. The tribals usually are governed by the local chieftains or the Gaon. They are called Gaon Budhas or Doles.
Mhm.
In some places they are called Doles. Dole is the chief priest of the village. He actually handles every affair in the village, and he is like a head priest of the village. Or Gaon Budhas, who are the administrative heads of the village, but their jurisdiction also extends into the religious and spiritual realm. So we went to a village, and we found that the whole village there was a lot of commotion. So we asked, and they asked who we are because they have never seen non-tribal coming to the village. They have in years perhaps. We said we are so honored. We tried to introduce ourselves. They did not understand. So finally, one of my friend hit upon an idea, and he said we are Hindu missionaries. Because they have seen only Christian missionaries, we said we are Hindu missionaries. The moment we said Hindu missionaries, some people came running towards us and they said, we are Hindus, we want some help. We said, what kind of help? They said, our Gaon Buddha is on deathbed, and the moment he dies, the Christians want him to be cremated according to the Christian customs. Christians from the neighboring village.
Right.
The neighboring village is a Christian village, and they have come to bury the dead Gaon Buddha. Gaon Buddha wasn't dead yet, but then they came to
Waiting
bury
upon
him.
him
They
to
were
die.
waiting for him to die, and they wanted to bury. Because if the Gaon Buddha dies as a Christian, the whole village becomes Christian.
Okay.
So these people said that we don't want to become Christians. Since you are a Hindu priest, please help us. We said, okay, we will talk to the pastors, and we will see that this man gets a Hindu cremation. So when we went to the Gaon Buddha's house, the whole village was converging. The people from the other villages were also there with their lathis and others. The dao is a sword that the tribal carries. So luckily for us, quite providentially, this man who was comatose, he suddenly woke up. The Christians have put a cross around his neck. The moment he woke up, he looked at all sides and he suddenly found that there was a cross slung around his shoulders. So he immediately pulled it and threw it. And within a couple of, in a matter of just few seconds, he again collapsed and he went comatose and he died. It was, call it providence or what, we do not know. Then the point was, the Christians wanted to give him a Christian burial. And the Hindus said that since this man wore a cross, but the moment he woke up, he came to his senses, he threw it. So he wanted to remain a Hindu. He was given a Hindu last rites, we can say, and the village remained a Hindu. I went to a village called Sakunibari. There was a whole family that got converted. Whole family. They became Christians. That's the only Christian family in the village. But the only Christian family was the most educated family in the village. He was a government servant. And one girl in the family who was 18 years of age refused to get converted. She said, I will not get converted. So she was being tortured, she was being beaten, she was being denied food so that she gets converted. And the whole village was agitated, but there was nothing that the village could do. So they approached the Hindu missionaries again. So we went and we tried to hold a meeting and then try to convince them. They let the girl live the way she wants because she was a major. If you are a major, if you are a minor, you have to listen to your parents, and your conversion doesn't actually, your opinion doesn't matter. But in this case, she was a minor and she was a major, and she was entitled to her, entitled to her opinion on religion. So we had a meeting. In the meeting, the whole village supported the girl. And this girl remained Hindu. She came out of the house, she walked out on the parents, and then she started living with other people. And she remained a Hindu, she married a Hindu. So there are a lot of such incidents where force was being used to convert people. There was a tribal man, I still remember his name. His name was Janduram Fangso. Fangso is an Amrikarbi tribal name. When we went to the village, he was tending his cows. We asked him about the village, and then he said, who are you? So as usual, we said, we are Hindu missionaries. He said, can you convert me to Hinduism? I asked, we will convert, but why did you become Christian in the first place? He said, I am the Gaon Buddha of this village. I am the head of this village, but I don't have children. So if I don't have children, the Gaon Buddha-ship or the head priest post will pass on to some other family. So I wanted a child. The Christians promised me a child. Can you imagine? They said, you will get a male child. If you worship Jesus, you will get a male child. And this man became a Christian and started worshipping 1 year, 2 years, 5 years over, and this man is not getting a child. And when there's no children, this Gaon Buddha-ship was to pass on to someone else after his death. So he said, when I'm not getting child either way, let me go back to my original religion. You know, what was he threatened with? The missionaries told him that we will bring terrorists from Nagaland. They will come with AK-47 and kill you. If you become a Hindu again, if you become an Amrikarbi again, you will be done to death. You will be put to death. Terrorists from Nagaland will come. So this man was afraid of Naga terrorists because he has seen some of them roaming in those areas despite the geographical distance. And the kind of stories of Naga terrorists have instilled fear in him rather. When we went, he became emboldened and he said, I want to come back to Hindu religion. So we converted him. Of course, we had our own procedure. We chanted some mantras and we sprinkled some water and we said, from today onwards you are Hindu. So the whole village became Hindu again. And of course, he didn't get a child even after becoming a Hindu because that's a biological issue. But then he was happy that he is back to his back to the religion of his forefathers. So such incidents, there are a lot of incidents where conversions are not, which tell the story that the conversions are not because of a change of heart, not because of spiritual experiences.
Absolutely.
They are because of allurement, fraud, instilling of fear or threat, coercion. I'll give you one more example. The name of the village was Sakoni Badi. We met a 7-year-old boy, a boy who was studying in class 7. He said, we met him, we were inquiring about the village, because it's very rare to see people before actually, the villages are isolated unit. There is huge distance between villages and you have to pass through the jungles. So when you meet someone, you strike up a conversation. We asked him, what does he do? Where does he study? He said, I'm studying in Don Bosco in Manipur. So Manipur is quite far off from the place he was living, almost 400 or 500 kilometers. I said, how are you going to Manipur? He said, I've become a Christian. Now, what about your family? He said, my family is still Hindu.
So
I said,
what is the link between being able to travel 400-500 kilometers?
Usually
study
tribals
and
don't
being
travel
Christian?
long.
Okay.
Usually tribals like to stay in there. That's the very typical feature
So
of.
he was living away from home and living
Yeah,
in
he was
Manipur
going to
go
Manipur to
Don
study.
Bosco.
He was going to meet some missionary, and then the missionary was to take him to Manipur
Mhm.
because he wanted to study beyond class 5. The nearest class school was about 10 or 15 kilometers away, and when he wanted to study beyond class 5, the only option for him was missionaries, and missionaries were taking him.
Okay.
And I said, what about your family? His family remained a Hindu. I said, why? If you have to study beyond class 5, you have to get converted.
Mhm.
If you don't convert, you will not be given education. So this education is not a free education. You have to get converted.
That's the cost.
So several such incidents where coercion was employed, fraud was employed, inducements were given, and that's how the conversions were happening. So the conversions that are happening in most of the places in Assam, Manipur, and these places.
And that's the story to this day.
Yes, that's what it is.
So you cannot say that it was back in the day when you were actually traveling in those villages
Areas,
and
yeah.
tribal areas.
The same kind of
But
situation.
It's the same kind of situation, whether doesn't matter, tribal area, rural, urban, doesn't matter.
Yes.
The story is the same.
Story is the same.
Usually when we talk about Northeast, we are only focused on their separatist ideologies.
Yes.
So that makes me ask the question, can you name, are there any icons from that area,
Yeah.
from that region of India, that have participated in the Indian
Freedom movement.
independence movement?
That's a very important and very interesting question, Esther ji. And I personally feel Northeast doesn't exist in the collective memory of rest of the country, and we do not even know what happened there, the kind of battles that the people
What
fought,
happened and what happens?
what is happening. Also, people are unaware.
Mhm.
There's a huge fight going on for cultural preservation, tradition preservation, preservation of indigenous faith to this day, and that largely goes unreported. During the freedom fight also, the tribals have never given up. The first battle against the tribals starts the moment the white man entered the northeastern areas, and it went on till 1931. There were many battles. For instance, in the Garo Hills, there is a freedom fighter called Yu Kiang Nungba. Yu Kiang Nungba tormented the Britishers for a couple of years. Single-handedly, he fought them. He killed several British officers and tried to establish the Kasi kingdom. Yu Kiang Nungba is a Garo actually. Garo king.
What year was this?
This was in the 18th century,
1800s.
1800s. Same way, there is a Mijo woman head priest of a Mijo village. Her name is Lai Puyani. And this lady was one such Mijo leader, community leader, who opposed both the white man, the administrator, as well as the proselytizer for nearly 40 years, till her death. The people could not, the missionaries and the Britishers could not enter her village. Then there is this famous story of Jadonang and Ranima Gaidinlu that I related to you. Jadonang said that, in about 1920s, he started waging a war against the Britishers. He was hanged. After his hanging, his sister Gaidinlu took up the battle, and she continues till 1931. The Khamtis, the Garos, the Rabhas, the Bodos, all these tribes have fought the Britishers. They have their own. Shambhudan Singlo is one such leader. And then Manipur, of course, in 1857 also, Manipur has a great history. Pauna Brajwasi, Brigadier General Thangal, and then Veer Tikendrajit. And in the Khasis, among the Khasi community, there is a hero, freedom fighter called U. Tirat Singh. Tirat is nothing but Tirtha Singh. Tirat Singh fought against. Even in Assam, there were leaders like Maniram Dewan, Pioli Phukan, who fought against the Britishers in 1857, and even after that they fought. There are a lot of Nagas who have joined Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in his Azad Hind Fauj and fought the Britishers. One of them is Japu Angami Fizo, who later on, because of the government's wrong handling, became a separatist. He was part of Subhash Chandra Bose's army. He fought against the Britishers. Later he became a tool in the hands of the British. So this, you have the Azad Hind Fauj memorial in a place called Moirang in Manipur. You can see the weapons used, the kind of attire the people sported. The museum is INA Museum, Azad Indian National Army, or Azad Hind Fauj Museum. So the local people supported these movements. Individual tribals supported these movements. Tribal groups were part of the agitation against the Britishers. But post 1857, once the inner line permit came, the tribals were separated from rest of the country, and their battle became an isolated battle, and it did not become part of the collective independence movement of this country. It's only in 1944, 42 to 44 that we talk of Azad Hind Fauj. So the rest of the fight was in Manipur and Assam. So they have their own freedom fighters. They have their own icons who fought against the Britishers. For example, Ranima Gaidinlu, about whom I talked about. She was given Padma Shri for her role in the freedom movement.